Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us on this call today. This is a conversation about regulations, regulators, and green finance and green bonds in the ASEAN region. This has been a market that has grown quickly in the last couple of years. But first, let me introduce my esteemed panelists, all of whom have been key to growing green finance in the region. First, if I can introduce Jomkwan Kongsakul from the Securities and Exchange Commission of Thailand. She's the Assistant Secretary General there. Datuk Zainal Izlan Zainal Abidin from the Securities Commission of Malaysia. He's the Deputy Chief Executive. And Commissioner F. Amatong from the Securities and Exchange Commission of the Philippines. It's been a journey we've been on in the last few years, and I want to applaud the leadership of the ASEAN Capital Markets Forum in growing green bonds, and both F and Izlan have played a material and continue to play a central role in development, but also under the chairmanship of the Thai Securities Commission, we've seen the ACMF be very active in promoting green bonds and green finance in the region. Now, this panel will look at what's happening, what has happened a little bit, and what hopefully is going to happen with this market in the midst of this crisis. I mean, we are in the middle of a global recession induced by a pandemic, as the World Health Organization has described it. All our economies have gone through a rather unusual period with lockdowns, shutdowns, collapse of markets briefly, a little bit of a rebound now happening. We need to understand this crisis as not an isolated incident. The World Health Organization and the International Panel of Climate Change Health Committee have been warning us for 20 years now that pandemics will be a feature of climate change in the 21st century. And we can expect to have a few of these coming through. We can also expect to have other climate shocks, which will have a similar rough impact on the economy. There'll be floods, for example, because of increased storm surge and sea level rise. And Bangkok already experienced a really severe one of these a few years ago that had a massive impact on global supply chains, because Bangkok is a center of many industries in terms of supplying components like electronics. We can expect to have severe heat incidents in some parts of the world, especially places like northern India or China or the Middle East, which could lead to significant loss of life and significant outages for economies. There are many things we're going to experience in this century, which will, in terms of climate, make it a very different century to the last century. We're actually on a race now, not to stop climate shocks. They're done. We will get 2 degrees warming or so, and that will lead to a series of shocks that we need to make sure our economies and our societies are more resilient so they can deal with them. But we're also in a race to inoculate against catastrophic climate change. The International Panel of Climate Change says we need to reduce emissions globally by 50%. Clearly, that needs to be led by the high carbon developed countries of the world. But unfortunately, we're all in this, so we all have a role to play in greening our economies going forward to avert that catastrophic change. ASEAN is in the front line of the impacts of climate change. Manila is already experiencing more intense typhoons than ever before and a longer typhoon season. This is climate change happening, folks. We need to start preparing for that. So the lesson to be learned from the climate impacts going forward, our understanding of them, is there's a lot to be done to prepare. It includes the health system. By ensuring that our health system has greater redundancies and greater ability to deal with pandemics, we will survive our future crises better. By ensuring that our social protection systems are better organized to deal with shocks, we will survive these crises better. But today, we're focusing on the green bond market, which is, if you like, a market that will allow us to raise capital for the sort of things we have to do in the future, mitigation and resilience. There's a couple of figures I'd like to share with you about how the market has gone so far. We've seen a rapid global growth in the green bond market. What's been interesting has been the growth of Asia Pac now as the second largest component after Europe of this market. Now, China is the largest issuer in the market, but ASEAN has also been growing quite significantly thanks to the work of the various securities commissions and the ASEAN Capital Markets Forum. Look at this phenomenal growth rate that we see in the region. The chart is showing that we grew from virtually nothing in 2016 to a market of, in US dollars equivalent, 8 billion already in the region, dominated by financial banks and non-financial corporates in particular, slightly different in different markets. Now, that is green sukuk in the Malaysian circumstance and in Indonesia, and green bonds in other markets. So this is an extraordinary growth. And note the green loans proportion on the graph too. So we have a significant amount of green loans in the region, and we actually expect that to be the fastest growing component of this green finance market in the near future, as it is in other areas such as China, where at the moment, green loans are 10 times the size of the green bonds market, which is extraordinary. And we see this beginning to happen in Australia and New Zealand and in other markets as well. So in the overall region, we've seen issuance now from Malaysia, where we've got roughly 1.3 billion US equivalent in green sukuk. In Indonesia, it's sitting at about 2.88 billion. In Thailand, we're about at the $1 billion equivalent. In Vietnam, we've seen issuance as well in early days, but the Vietnamese Prime Minister's statement on green finance includes a mission to grow green bonds. And of course, in the Philippines, we've seen roughly $2 billion equivalent in green bonds. The Climate Bonds Initiative has been very proud to be able to collaborate with regulators in the region to be able to support the growth in this market. We've seen a number of sovereigns coming out of Indonesia. We're not sure whether other states will tackle this in the near future. There is talk of China issuing a sovereign, which might send a signal. In Europe, the French government has just issued another tap on their sovereign. They're up at 23 billion euros of green issuance, and we have about a dozen sovereign issuers around the world, with another dozen queuing to come out. A lot of different slices of this market. So now I want to turn to our panelists to talk about what's going on. Jomkwan Kongsakul, or Jomkwan, and this is an informal roundtable discussion, everyone. Please ask your questions, as I said. Tell us what's happening in Thailand and these amazing measures you've been taking to grow green finance.
Hi, hello everyone. I'm Jomkwan. Nice to see you all in virtual world. To answer Sean's question, I have to say that, to make this all happen, we need the actions of all key stakeholders in the sustainable finance ecosystem. It's not just issuer, just investor or whatsoever, but I mean, everybody in the ecosystem have to work together. So what we have done so far is that we try to support them in so many ways, not just to, support the green bond markets, but we also would like to strengthen the whole ecosystem of the sustainable capital market in Thailand. So this is coming from the belief that the ESG responsibilities have impacts not only for the firm's performance or their long-term value creation. We think that it also impact on the investment return that the investor going to get. So that's why I like to show to you all today about the SEC roadmap and the actions that we have done so far, and what we are going to do in the near future. Starting from the first thing is the product. In Thailand, we issued the regulation to set the criteria for the green bonds that are quite aligned with the international standards, and we provide some kind of the handbook for the firms that would like to issue the green bond. So it will be like their study guide. And we have some kind of incentive for the issuers who would like to issue the green bond. We give them the fee waiver. They don't have to pay for the approval fee and the filing fee. We waive those fees to just support them to get some incentive.
Wow,
and
that's fantastic.
Yeah. And our next move is that we're going to set the criteria for the green REITs and green infra fund as well, because it would be better if we have the product that provide the income stream from the green buildings, or even the low carbon emission transportation, something like that. And that's for the product.
And we've already seen, sorry, Jomkwan, we've already seen a bond from BTS, I think it is, in Bangkok for low carbon transportation, haven't we?
Yeah, we have one of that, and that one is very successful because from that one, because that one is the first one that offering to the public high net worth, and it's successful. It increase the awareness of the people,
So this is a retail bond.
It's not retail asset. It's a bond for the institutional
individuals
and the high net worth investor. It's high net worth individual that invest in that bonds, and everything is very impressive in that one because they get the oversubscription. They have the new investor base. I talked about that later about that successful. The second key stakeholder is the issuer. So what we do is that we have joint hand with other parties like the UK government and even the ADB to provide some kind of technical assistance for the firms who would like to issue the green bonds. And apart from the green bonds, we also require the listed company to upgrade their annual report to what we call the one report. The very special about one report is that we require the listed company to disclose how they integrate the ESG responsibilities. I mean, not just the green responsibilities, but I mean the whole ESG responsibilities in the business operation. Okay, and we know that it's quite a tough issue for the small and medium firms to do that, to have ESG responsibility. So what we do is that we have some kind of capacity building for them. And we also give them flexibility to apply the concept, because we know that one size doesn't fit all. That's what we do for the issuers or the firms. And the next one is the platforms. The platform is another important key driver for the sustainable ecosystem, because it's going to help increase the visibility of the ESG products. I'm talking about green bonds, green sustainable bonds, or social bond, green risk, green infra in the future, or whatsoever. We can have like one-stop shop for the investor that they can just get in and can see the in-depth information about this product. So it will help increase the visibility of this kind of product if we have that kind of platform. The next one is the investor, because forcing the firms alone to issue the bond or to disclose the green, the ESG responsibility is useless if investors don't care about that. So what we do is that we try to create the demand, and there's so many things that we have done so far. The first one is that we launched what we call the Investment Governance Code, or the I Code, in 2017. We promote the institutional investor to plug in or to integrate the ESG factors into their investment decision-making process. And right now we have like 64 signatories, including all 26 asset management companies, 6 securities company, 14 insurance company. They all together in the and they adopt the I Code that we launched. And also we have some kind of what we call the negative list. Negative list is the mutual agreement among 32 institutional investors that they agree not to invest in bad ESG firms.
Right.
And yeah, and this is very powerful, because that money is very big. So it's a powerful force to force to shape the market. Okay.
So
And
you've been creating domestic demand, working with them to ensure that there's a local Thai baht demand as well as an international demand of the market, and it's working.
yeah. I think it's working for the institutional investor. Okay, and it's not we do that alone. We have to cooperate. We have the cooperation with other key stakeholders, the government pension funds, the Association of Investment Management companies, the insurance company, everyone. We work together, and also the central bank and Ministry of Finance as well. Yeah, to done all these things. And also we are in the process of promoting the ESG funds. We are working with the Association of Investment Management companies to draft the guidelines for ESG investment. And we also encourage the asset owner like private pension funds, starting from our Provident Fund, the SEC Provident Fund. We demand the fund manager to have some kind of ESG investment, because we think about the long-term sustainable investment return that our employees going to get. Okay. And the last but not least is the reviewer and assessor, because we need this person to guarantee that this is not a green watching, they are the one that going to complete the whole picture of the green bond market. So right now we have the ADB that provide the technical assistance and funding, because we would like to build up the local accessor in Thailand to save the cost for the issuers. Otherwise, the issuer have to use foreign reviewer, and it's quite expensive for them. So I think this one is going to help them and increase the supply for the green bonds.
Fantastic. That's really good. And of course, in Thailand, both the IFC and the Asian Development Bank have been very important and very supportive for the initial issuers to come to market. So it's worth noting. Izlan, if I can go to you next, in Malaysia, and it's been a long time since you and I first met at an Islamic Economy Conference, I think many years ago. And yes, you've been pushing very hard the growth of sukuk, social sukuk, and now green sukuk in particular. So your policy and your approach there has been embedded in a larger project around it. Tell us a bit more about that, and then of course about what the impact for the green sukuk market's been.
Okay. Thanks, Sean. We are showing issuances for the last 3 years from 2017, but if I could just go back a few more years before that, when we actually started looking at the space formally, it was actually in 2014 when we started really looking at this sustainable and responsible segment. So what we did was, first of all, we needed to define or use the terminology where all relevant stakeholders would understand what we are referring to. So we have used the term sustainable and responsible investment, or SRI, to cover whatever that relates to sustainability, social finance, ethical finance, environmental or green finance, and the likes. So first of all, it was the terminology that we set in 2014. Then after that, we introduced what we call the 5 I strategy to develop the ecosystem for SRI. And the 5 I's represent instruments, issuers, investors, internal governance culture, and information architecture. So these are the 5 sort of key areas where we embark on developing for a more facilitative ecosystem for the SRI market. And the first, I suppose, guidelines or regulations that we put in place was also in 2014. And this is the SRI Sukuk framework, which you referred to, Sean. And this actually leveraged on the the credentials that Malaysia has in the Islamic finance and Islamic capital market space. So the SRI Sukuk framework was introduced in 2014, and the first issuance under this framework came in 2015, which was the social sukuk that are used for development of trust schools, so education-related objective. Then in 2017, we'll go back to your chart here, Sean. 2017 was the first global issuance of a green sukuk by a Malaysian corporate. And this was followed by a few other issuances, as you have aptly summarized on the screen. And I think what we focus on is getting more issuers from other industries or segments as well, if you're talking about green. So we do have issuers for renewable energy. We have issuers for green building, and we also have issuers for mini hydro, among others, to date. And in 2019, having gone through about 5 years of this sort of development, we introduced or developed our SRI roadmap for sustainable and responsible investment for the Malaysian capital market. And this was launched towards the end of 2019. And it essentially looked back at the 5 I's, and we introduced 20 recommendations to further support the development of these 5 I's within the SRI ecosystem in Malaysia. So this is, I suppose, the journey that we have taken so far. And we are very much in implementing some of these recommendations. Some are sort of lower hanging fruits and implemented on a more immediate term basis. Some are still work in progress in terms of implementation plans. But one of the first initiatives that came out from this roadmap in 2019 was a revision to the SRI Sukuk framework that was by then about 5 years old. As we had more experience in looking at how the market worked, what needed to be done to facilitate further development and growth of the green market, the green finance market, as well as sustainable finance market. So among others, we expanded the eligibility or list of eligible projects to also include not just those undertaking the projects themselves, but also for financial institutions, for example, to issue sukuk, which are then used to fund various projects that are undertaken by the end operators or promoters. So this, we believe, will help to further grow the green finance market. And to support this, we also introduced, towards the end of 2017, guidelines on SRI funds. And this actually, in addition to broadening the fund management market, it also helps to create demand for instruments like Sukuk, the SRI Sukuk, and other green bonds as well as social and sustainability bonds. So we are pretty much in this, Sean, as you know, actively pursuing various initiatives. And we may speak about this a bit later. We are also very much involved in the ASEAN the bond standards, the green bond standards, social bond standards, and the sustainability bond standards. But perhaps we'll take that up at a later stage. Thank you, Sean. Sorry, can't hear you, Sean.
You're on mute, Sean.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Technical difficulties. I'm still learning. I was going to say thank you for that. Yes, let's shift to the Philippines and F. But you know, I think it's interesting that you've had a long journey and a very successful journey here, and there's a lesson there for other countries in ASEAN that are now beginning to look at this going forward. Of course, the Philippines has also been on quite a journey over the last few years, a slightly different makeup of the market. Commissioner F. Amatong, we've become friends on this journey to go green. Tell us about the Philippine story and especially some of the great stories that came out of the banking sector in this before we cut to what's happening now and into the future.
Thank you, Sean. But on the note of, on technical difficulties, let me just say that, and your discussion earlier about having to still keep an eye on the ball on climate even as we go through this COVID pandemic. Let me just inform our audience that right now there is actually a typhoon traveling through the eastern part of the Philippines, the Philippine island of Luzon, and for that reason, my own the stability of my own internet connection may be affected by the typhoon. So I apologize in advance in case I'm cut off. Having said that, and in the spirit of resiliency, let me try to tackle your question, Sean. Definitely, it's been a banner. 2019 was a banner year for the Philippines in terms of green bonds. We now have roughly about $2 billion worth of green bonds that have been issued by Philippine companies, both in local currency onshore and in US dollars offshore. Majority of those issuances have come from our banking sector, as you mentioned, Sean. About 5 of our banks have issued green bonds, again, both onshore in Philippine pesos and in US dollars offshore. We've also had a couple of energy companies tap the markets, including Aboitiz Power Renewables, which was the first geothermal green bond that was issued, I believe, around 2014. Mm-hmm. But last year, as you said, you have it on your slides, about 7 issuances totaling 1.4 billion, and I think what was very interesting for us was that for those that tap the international market, especially, the report has been that there has been, in fact, rate compression when it comes, or yield compression when it comes to the yields charged on their bonds. And specifically, one of our banks, Bank of Philippine Islands, was able to issue a 100 million Swiss franc bond last year with a negative yield. So last year,
a negative yield.
A negative yield. So I think the base price was bought at a slight premium over the 100 million Swiss franc face value of the bond when it was issued last year. And this has not only been for that Swiss issuance. Even the dollar issuances have experienced, at least anecdotally from the issuers, lower coupon rates than their plain vanilla issuances.
So banks are shaving the cost of capital with this successfully in the Philippines. I mean, a negative yield is pretty amazing. Is that the first negative yield bond?
No yield is good too.
Yes, good point. Good point. Okay, sorry.
I think 2019 kind of established for Philippine companies some business reasons for exploring the green bond market. All of the issuers, both domestic and foreign issuances, all experienced oversubscription, substantial oversubscription. And again, we had that negative yield experience with the Swiss issuance of BPI. And that was really strong momentum coming from 2019, moving into 2020, when in February we had our first smaller size issuance by a real estate company, a medium-sized real estate company, not a very large issuance, something like $60 million worth of issuance in pesos, but I think it also demonstrated that the green bond market is not only for large, well-established corporates, but also for medium-sized companies that have a commitment to sustainability and have a commitment to a green future. And we were very upbeat about the momentum coming into this year in February, and then of course we had this COVID-19 pandemic come in. Having said that, I am fairly confident that when things normalize a bit here in the Philippines, we will still see continuous issuances of green bonds especially because some of our development banks already have programs to issue roughly 30 billion pesos worth of green bonds within the year. So we expect the market to recover once we've sorted out some of the issues surrounding being able to do business online and digitally in this atmosphere of COVID-19.
In fact, we've got a question from Cecilia Tam at OECD about that going online that I'd like to come back to. But let's just talk about the crisis, the COVID crisis, for a minute. And I'm interested to see the perspective from Malaysia and Thailand. Globally, we saw flat issuance, 20% lower than the previous March during March. However, in April, green bond issuance has bounced way back up. It's still 16% lower than last April globally, but only 16% lower, which is pretty amazing. But more importantly, we've seen some amazing deals come to the table in hard currencies. You know, we saw Iberdrola with a relatively low rated bond come to the market in euros in Spain, 11.5 times oversubscribed, an amazing coupon. And then just the last 2 weeks, we've seen Swisscom come out with a 1 billion euro bond in, I think it was 1 billion euros, 1 billion anyway in Europe, with 14.5 times oversubscription and an amazing coupon. And then last week in China, we saw a certified climate bond issuer in Jiangsu issue a bond where they got a coupon that was 100 basis points below the PBOC the benchmark rate. So something is happening. There's no doubt about it when people are coming to market. And we also are seeing a lot of people talking about coming to market. We're maintaining our target for this year of 350 billion of issuance, which is a 50% increase on last year, based on despite the depression in the first quarter globally. But is that, I mean, what are you seeing though in Malaysia, Izlan? I mean, do you see this thing growing again, or do you see it being overtaken by other recovery issues in the next few months? What's your hunch?
Well, I believe you look at the medium to longer term, it will come back, Sean. I think the more immediate focus is really on economic recovery, restarting the economy, making sure that existing businesses are back on track. Because we have our own version of the lockdown, which is the MCO, Movement Control Order. And this has been slightly loosened over the last 2 weeks to allow more businesses to come back and work, restart their work. So gradually, I believe we will see some semblance of return to normalcy, although it will be a new normal. But it will be some elements of looking back at the projects that would require funding. From an infrastructure perspective, from rebuilding perspective and development perspective, and some of this will certainly be aligned with the green agenda. Some of them could be a combination of green and social, and therefore sustainable finance would come into play. And I think it's a matter of time that we will see new issuances or new issuers coming to the market to fund the projects. Also, just to add that you showed that the value of issuances in Malaysia is about $1.4 billion to date, and there's actually an approved amount of about $2.1 billion in terms of green and sustainable bonds and sukuk. So there's already in the pipeline the potential to raise more, about 0.7 billion in $700 million immediately, or as the need requires, as these facilities or programs have already been approved but not issued yet.
Wow, fantastic. So that is really something beginning to start. By the way, someone's just pointed to me, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Sean Kidney, CEO of the Climate Bonds Initiative. My apologies. And on the screen next to me is Cedric Grimaud, who's the ASEAN project manager for climate bonds, who will probably say a word a little later. Apologies, everyone online. Just on the COVID and the crisis thing, what we're seeing in other countries is a significant issuance around recovery bonds. In China, we've seen 300 so-called COVID bonds issued. Some of those are green bonds. There's a wind energy company in Wuhan that's issued a COVID bond to finance the supplying of power for people in lockdown in Wuhan. Cool idea. It fits under the green bond regulations, but there's a marketing issue, which I think is a welcome development, because this is all about capital being aligned with social purpose, which is, of course, integral to Islamic finance, that you should be contributing to the community as part of your work in investing, and of course integral to the green bond market around the world. So I think you're right. I think we're going to see a lot of variations on this theme going forward around the world, in Europe and in the US as well. Resilience bonds, for example, and of course health sector bonds. Jomkwan, in the Thai market, are you seeing this beginning to happen yet? Are there stirrings of COVID issuance, resilience issuance, and what do you think is the prognosis for the green bond market for the rest of this year?
I think actually maybe it's not up to the COVID situation. I would say that we have the excess liquidity, and there's somebody there that needs funding, you know, and in some way we have to match together, right? And from our past, we saw the successful of the green bond issuance in the past. Starting from year 2018, we have like 2 green bonds issuance and 1 sustainability bond. In year 2019, we have 2 green bonds, and this year as well we expect to see more. This is because we have huge potential. I think in Thailand, even in Thailand, I think we have a huge potential for the green bond to grow. This is because we have a very strong pipeline of renewable energy project like wind, solar, or biogas, something like that. And we also have mega project like including the low carbon transportation or something like that. So I think the demand and the supply have to be matched. And because we heard from the issuer who used to issue green bond, the one that you just mentioned earlier, Sean, the BTS group, because I've talked to the CEO of the BTS group, and he shared that he very happy with issuing the green bond, because it can help the company expand the investor base. Like 1/3 are the new investor, and it's more like 8 times over subscription. At the beginning, maybe they just want to issue only 5,000 million baht issue, but then, you know, the demands keep coming to like 42,000, so it's more like 8 times over subscription. At the end, the company issue like 13,000 or something. It's higher than what they expect. And another thing that is very interesting is that the issuer can lower cost of funding for some tenors, because like for the BTS group, the yield, the bond yield for the 10-year tenors is lower than the traditional bonds. So that's quite interesting, and issuer can see that maybe it's better off for them to issue this kind of bond, because there's a demand there from the investor. And also, there's something that I like to share is that the green bond, it helps the issuer can match long-term financing needs with their demand of the bond, because normally when the issuer want the long-term financing, normally they issue short-term bonds and then they keep rolling over the bond when that bond reach their maturities. But for the green bond, they see that there's the demand there for the long-term bond, for the green bonds, and the most important thing is that they can gain some kind of reputation, because they can show the public that they care about making a better world, something like that. So in my opinion, I think it's it's a bright future for the green bond, and even in the near future, because we've been talking to the government agency and the state-owned enterprise, and they plan to issue this green bond and also the social bond maybe by the end of this year. There's one green bond that one of the SOE, this is public already, so maybe I can mention them. The Bank of Agriculture, they have the project to grant the loan for planting trees to renew the forest. That's one example of our green bond. Another one is for the mass transit railway, something like that. So, so it's a potential in Thailand, I think.
So these are very, very positive comments. I'm interested, a question to you, Ev, perhaps. In Malaysia, this social and SRI project, Izlan, has been central to your thinking about the development of the Malaysian capital markets. You've seen this as a core plank in what you described to me in the past. How do you see the relationship between the green bond market development in Philippines and the broader market development, the maturing of the Philippines economy? What's your thinking?
Oh, was that to me or to Izlan? I'm sorry, Sean.
Well, I was throwing a line to Izlan because they've been thinking along these lines. And I'm now curious from the Philippines perspective. Do you have a similar thinking about green bonds being essential for the broader market development?
Well, we're at an earlier stage of bond market development as compared to Malaysia. Malaysia has a much larger, more mature bond market. But we think that the green, social, and sustainability bonds can play a key role in growing our market. So, if you will, we are developing the market as we are also developing the green, social, and sustainable bond market. And green, social, and sustainable because it appears to attract a wider group of investors, both domestically and internationally. And because there are these anecdotal, I mean, I don't think we can emphasize it too much, but there seems to be anecdotal evidence of rate compression and oversubscription. There are ways in which to demonstrate that the bond market and is particularly the green, social, and sustainable bond markets are an alternative, cost-efficient way for companies to grow money for themselves, to demonstrate their commitment to a more sustainable and differentiate themselves from others in the market.
So, in terms of the ASEAN Capital Markets Forum work, perhaps over to you, Izlan.
Yeah.
What are the next steps for ACMF in growing this? I mean, you've worked together as securities commissions in the region to develop green bond guidelines, which have now been used in all of your countries. What do you see the next steps working regionally? What sort of things are you working on?
Well, Sean, the chairs of all the regulators in ASEAN just endorsed the roadmap for the ASEAN capital markets, sustainable capital markets. So the ACMF roadmap for the ASEAN capital markets would be rolled out in stages. I think, sorry, I should be clear, is a roadmap on sustainable capital markets in ASEAN.
Yeah.
So to make it directly relevant to our discussions today. So this was endorsed in March, and then we had the beginning of the pandemic. But the plan really is to roll out there's a series of 15 recommendations that are contained in this roadmap. And there's work in store. And we have also from this 15 identified 6 particular initiatives that would be rolled out more immediately than the rest. And just to share very quickly, the first is in the area of promoting corporate sustainability disclosure. Mm-hmm. Second is on institutional investor disclosures. The third is on developing sustainable fund standards. The fourth is on improving market access for sustainable products. Fifth is on knowledge transfer and capacity building. And sixth is on coordination with public and financial sectors. So these are 6 of the 15 recommendations that we collectively have identified as being, as being prioritized for rollout immediately. And so the work is being undertaken, and there's also assignments or allocations of responsibilities among the various working groups within the ACMF to undertake these initiatives.
Now, this report is public now on the ACMF website, is that right?
Yes, that's correct. It's available.
Which is a great report, everyone. You should go, you should have a look. Just search for ASEAN Capital Markets Forum. We had one question from a listener saying, can we expect to see a standardization of disclosure approaches across regulators in the region? Is that a likely outcome of that? And perhaps that's a question to F or Jomkwan. Is this your thinking, that you have a common approach in the region? F, start with you.
Yeah, well, in a sense, when we came up with the ASEAN capital market green bond standards, social bond standards, and sustainability bond standards, in effect, there is the sense of commonality in disclosure standards, in the sense that the standards provide a very clear guide on what would be considered a green, social, or sustainable bond in ASEAN. Now, having said that, implementation is still very much for each country to adopt the standards and implement domestically as appropriate to that country or jurisdiction. But you have this initial common understanding in the green bond, social bond, and sustainability standards, a certain common understanding of what we mean and what is allowable as a green bond, social bond, or sustainable bond. So in that sense, I think we have a common starting point and common area of disclosure, but I would assume that in each market, depending on the demand of investors, specific requirements as to level of disclosure may vary a bit from country to country.
Jomkwan, in Thailand, another question that just come through. Do you have how does the UC, the green bond market, link up with Thailand's climate change plans, the NDC and so on? Do you see a connection? Is this a discussion that you have with those bodies this stage, or is that something that will be looked at in the future?
You mean again, please, your question again, please?
How useful do you think the green bond market is to achieve Thailand's climate change ambitions, to support those? And do you have a dialogue with the ministries that are managing the climate change plan? Is that something that's happened in the past, a discussion?
Actually, I would say that we've been working with the Thailand Greenhouse Gas Management Organization. Because of that commitment that the government have, actually, what they ask from us is that they want their listed company to disclose the information about the carbon emission on the annual report, something like that. So that's why we issue the regulation requiring the listed company to disclose this information. But I think in a couple of years from now, and also we require the newcomer, I mean the one who the applicant would like to submit the IPO for approval. We require them to disclose the carbon emission information on their filing, so that it will be the information that investor would see before they're making an investment decision. That's one thing. Another thing is that we have the green bond criteria that we try to, I would say, copy that from the international standards like ICMA or ASEAN standard, and they have, if they want to issue the green bond, when they have to disclose all those kind of information. So I think that from our term as a capital market regulator, that's what we can do, to help the government, to link that to the commitment that they have with the climate change.
Now thank you for that. I mean, that's something I think is happening in every country. I know that in the Philippines, if you've been involved in a cross-ministerial committee looking at the kinds of investments that might be relevant, and some of which could be found in the green bond market, right? Can you give us any color about how advanced those discussions are?
So in the Philippines, I think you'll notice from my remarks that we have the lightest touch in terms of regulation of green bonds. Our whole theory has been, to inform issuers and investors about the standards, and then for them to make their own business decisions. Now, having said that, government is very committed to a more sustainable future. And within the Philippine government, there is an interagency task force that's trying to come together to have a common understanding of, I hesitate to use your favorite term, taxonomy, Sean, but what I would like to call a green dictionary of terms, but essentially an understanding within the Philippine government of what would be green products, green services, green standards for government buildings, and this would guide government's procurement and decision-making going forward. So we wouldn't necessarily impose these standards on the private sector, but rather the thinking is to impose these standards of green and sustainable on government's decision-making. So when government contracts out with a supplier, is that supplier, does he align with the requirements of sustainability and social social responsibility? So the idea is to embed criteria inside government's decision-making that's aligned across all agencies in Philippine government, but also having a direct impact on economic decisions by the government in terms of how it procures goods and services, how it accredits suppliers, and the programs and infrastructure it undertakes. And that's something that's ongoing now with assistance from the UK government, from partners such as yourselves at CBI, and partners from ADB and other ADB and IFC and World Bank and other multilateral agencies.
This is a fantastic example of what every country around the world needs to do. And I will come back for all of you to finish up asking what your advice would be to regulators in other countries that are beginning to tackle and think about this issue. Izlan, in Malaysia, Bank Negara, the central bank, has issued a paper on principles for taxonomy, which is a very useful paper a while ago. Do you see this discussion informing the recovery? I mean, in Europe, we're having a very loud discussion about making the recovery a green and resilient recovery. Is this coming up too in Malaysia at the moment? Is that part of the discussion?
Well, the paper is going around for public for consultation by the industry, relevant stakeholders. I think for us, I think the issue of the taxonomy is one that has been identified both at in a roadmap at the Malaysian level as well as the ASEAN level. And I think discussions are ongoing. I think there's still, I suppose, active debate and deliberations in terms of how we should put into place taxonomy, if any, whether it should be mandatory or voluntary. I think the idea here is, ASEAN still being relatively a nascent market for sustainable finance, although you have kindly, Sean, highlighted some of the achievements that ASEAN has made over the last few years. But I think there's still a lot of issues that need to be ironed up at ground level. I mean, to allow for greater awareness and education among the various stakeholders. Taxonomy would help in forming or enhancing that awareness of what constitute say green projects. But we are also mindful that we need to develop something that is fit for our purpose rather than taking it on from other regions which may or may not be appropriate for us. So this is some of the deliberations that are being undertaken. And I think at the Malaysia level, as you put it, our colleagues at the central bank have come up with that paper, and we are all looking through that to see what would be the next step.
Okay, fantastic for that. Thank you. Cedric, as you're on screen, do you have any last questions for our panelists from Singapore, where you're based at the moment?
Well, I would like to thank them, first of all, for accepting to join this panel. This has been a very good discussion, and we look forward to support you in any way we can to grow this market. So, we are very interested to learn more about the corners of the market that need support, maybe those small issuers that ComF was referring to, that would really demonstrate that there is more potential for everyone in this market. But thanks again for this opportunity to speak with you today.
Thanks, Cedric, our Climate Bonds ASEAN Project Manager. Last words, folks, we're at the end of our time. We could talk for 2 hours on this. I think we're out of beat, but keeping it to format. Advice to the market or to other regulators about going forward, and also just remembering, are you optimistic about the future? Perhaps I can start with Jomkwan first.
I think that a big challenge for the firms is that they have to pay the extra cost, and they have to do additional work to issue the green bonds. I mean, they have to pay for the illegal work cost, and they have to do the reporting and everything. So, and the important thing is that the yield, the bond yield, or the cost of funding may not be lower. Extra cost, extra work, but the cost of funding is still the same compared to the traditional bond. So to tackle this problem, I think the issuer, they need to have some kind of strong will and commitment to do this. And also maybe we need some kind of MDB or ADB to be like a kickstart for them, to help them with technical assistance, to help them prepare the necessary process, and also to guarantee the demand at the beginning. And the second thing that I would like to say is challenges for the investor, because we are under low for long circumstances and people search for yield. So normally investor, especially retail investor, they don't trade off between short-term return and the long-term value creation or sustainable growth, or even the climate of this world. They don't care about that. They care about what they're going to get for the short-term yield. So maybe I think we need to educate them more and help them understand how the ESG responsibilities will impact on the firm's reputation, image, cost of funding, asset value, performance, and in turn it will have impact on the investment return that investors are going to get. So we need to educate them. And one more thing is that at the moment, there is no research or analysts that focusing on this area. So maybe we have to strengthen that research and analysis as well. Thank you.
That's a great idea. Very good point. In Europe, by the way, and in the US, and now beginning in other markets, we are finding that as the market gets going, and I appreciate in Thailand, we're still in a fairly early stage, we see secondary market performance of bonds being very strong. And we see some very interesting correlations around stock price bounce. So companies that issue green bonds get a stock price bounce and it stays up. And there's been a couple of major academic studies about this. Plus, we see an impact on other bonds with depressed yields once someone gets known as a green bond issuer. Investors are, certainly internationally, extremely conscious about the potential risks of climate change and environmental issues and the opportunities to shift their portfolios to be ahead of that risk. And they seem to be using green bonds as an indicator that an entity is doing something about it and therefore they're going to be a lower risk investment overall. So there's something very interesting going on, which I'm certainly expecting will play out as the ASEAN market grows, and perhaps in the Philippines we're already seeing a bit of this going forward. So it would be great to do some research. We might pick up this conversation afterwards to better track these kinds of details in the region. F, from your perspective, your advice to others, in issuers, regulators, and your thoughts about the future.
Yeah, again, we've probably adopted the lightest touch approach in the Philippines. We don't provide any special incentives or subsidies for green, social, or sustainable bonds. But what has been our objective all along was to provide guidance to both issuers and investors on what green bonds are, what kind of disclosure requirements they provide, or what are required, and what is being communicated to investors, and whether that has a real business benefit, for example, to investors. And our initial tentative observation is that once we've cleared up some of the basic questions, the investors and the issuers themselves see, they don't need a lot of convincing to actually tap the market once you've tried to tap the market. So I would agree with Jomkwan. A lot of the emphasis that we're doing is to provide issuer education and investor education on the merits of these kinds of products. And I think that's what's helped us so far.
Fantastic. Izlan, you must be very pleased with the progress since 2014. I mean, of course, not pleased in a sense that we all want this to be much, much larger than what it is now. But it's been a long and successful journey so far. Given that, your advice to others, your thoughts in the future?
Well, thank you, Sean. I don't think I'm in a position to give advice, but I'll share what experience. And I think, to us, the establishment of a facilitative ecosystem is key in developing this segment. I shared with you the 5I strategy in Malaysia, and we are still working on that and expanding on that through our roadmap that was issued last year. And I think it is in government sectors, investors, both retail and institutions. And I think as a result, a country that's developing this segment would need to look at what is best for their own internal needs, the domestic needs, while at the same time, given that this is becoming an increasingly global market, take into account factors that would make the local issuances attractive also from international perspective. This will help to grow, provide the demand for such issuances. And also, we talk about the 5I, there's a 6I, which I didn't talk about, which is not part of our strategy, but is relevant, which is incentives, Sean. And we do have some incentives that we provide to both to the issuers as well as to operators of green projects. The SC provides some to the capital market, and other agencies provide those incentives to the other relevant sectors. So these incentives do help, especially in kickstarting some of the market segment that are relatively new. So ecosystem, Sean.
Fantastic comments. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We've gone a little bit over time. Thank you for staying with us. This has been a chance to hear from key regulators in the ASEAN markets about green bonds and what's happening forward. So it's been very interesting. If you want to get this webinar, it will be available on YouTube. You can get a link at climatebonds.net/webinars. For those of you who can see the screen, there's a link there now. This will be available as a podcast. So F and Jomkwan and Izlan are going to become podcast superstars at this. It'll be available on Spotify and Google and Apple. And we look forward to further conversations to take this market forward. Our next climate bonds webinar will be on how green are green bonds, market standards. And you see the details on your screen now if you can, on the 21st of May at 1600 Singapore and Kuala Lumpur time. Please do join us. Again, climatebonds.net/webinars. This is an exciting space. This market has grown. The indication so far that it will actually grow faster than the normal market in a recovery period is what we're seeing internationally. But we do need to use this moment to think about how we need to expand our understanding of what is part of green, what is part of resilience. That will influence our thinking about recovery, and it will also influence our thinking about how we build in resilience so that F's country is better able to manage typhoons, an increase in storm intensity in the past, and all of us in Malaysia, in Indonesia, in Myanmar are able to navigate the impacts of climate change in the next few years. That's going to be an extension of this market. Watch this space, join us again, and if you're interested in reading about this matter, look at the Climate Bonds website, and of course, do look at the ASEAN Capital Markets Forum website for the great report that Izlan talked about earlier. Thank you for joining us, everyone. That's the end of the seminar today. We will aim to answer the questions that have been given us in the Q&A panel by email as best we can. Please do look out for the responses. Talk to you again soon, everyone. Thanks for joining us.